Hey there, welcome to the Healthy Mind channel, where I share true stories packed with surprising turns. If you like what you hear in this video, please hit that subscribe button and give it a thumbs up. It really helps keep our little corner of YouTube growing. Alright, let's jump into the story. I'm Tobin, 27 years old, living in a sleepy Wyoming town where nothing much ever changes. It's the kind of place where you see the same folks, walk the same roads, and deal with the same predictable weather day in and day out. I work in an auto shop just beyond the town limits, handling oil changes, brake jobs, and tune-ups. Nothing glamorous, but it keeps the bills paid. I've been on my own since I was 18, after losing both my parents in a car accident right after high school graduation. I don't have siblings or relatives who check in, so it's just me, no backup plan. But I didn't stay alone for long. When I was 21, during my second semester at the local community college, I met Liora. She stood out, sharp, reserved, with these striking green eyes that always seemed to hold a secret or two. We ended up sitting side by side in an intro to sociology class. She was quiet at first, but I couldn't help noticing how she always carried a beat-up yellow thermos full of coffee and how she'd triple underline words in her textbook that sparked her curiosity. After a while, I worked up the nerve to ask her out, and to my surprise, she said yes. I learned she was on her own too, a complete orphan. Her mom passed when she was a baby, and her dad died when she was 17, leaving her to bounce between distant relatives and tiny apartments. She worked at a bookstore, yet carried herself with this quiet strength, like she still believed the world had something good in store for her. We clicked in a way I'd never felt before. I remember her saying once, "Sure, we might all be on our own, but it doesn't have to feel so lonely." Those words stuck with me, like a little spark of hope. 8 months later, we moved in together into a small one-bedroom apartment with a drip-a faucet and walls so thin you could hear the neighbor's TV. We didn't mind, though. We'd spend evenings watching classic movies, spicing up ramen with hot sauce, and talking about our dreams. A house with a big porch, a dog, maybe 2 kids. She loved the name Celine for a daughter, and I thought it sounded perfect. We tied the knot on a rainy Saturday in mid-October. I borrowed a suit from my boss, and Liora wore a second-hand dress she'd fixed up herself. It was just us and the justice of the peace, but that simple moment felt like the start of something solid, something lasting. For about a year, life was everything we'd hoped for. Then Liora started feeling exhausted all the time, with headaches and nausea that wouldn't quit. She shrugged it off at first, blaming stress or maybe a vitamin deficiency. But one night she collapsed in the bathroom, and I rushed her to the ER, my heart pounding. After 10 days of tests, the doctors delivered the news: stage 3 lymphoma. I just sat there, nodding like I understood, but my mind was a blur of static. Liora held my hand, looking more concerned for me than for herself. From that moment, my world revolved around her. I dropped out of college, picked up extra shifts at the shop, took a second job at a gas station, and later started doing nighttime deliveries. I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a day. We tried everything: chemo, alternative treatments, even fundraising for a specialist out of state. I sold my truck, and when the bills kept piling up, I sold her engagement ring. She cried when I did that, but I told her it didn't matter. What mattered was her. There were days when hope flickered back, when she'd smile and crack jokes about the awful hospital food. But more often, there were tough days when she couldn't get out of bed, when her skin looked pale as paper and her voice was barely there. The final 7 weeks were the hardest. She didn't want visitors anymore, saying she didn't want people to remember her that way. It was just us in our little rented room, windows open to let in the breeze, like it could somehow ease her pain. I read her poetry every night, mostly Adrienne Rich, her favorite. Sometimes she'd drift off while I read, and I'd stay awake, just listening to her soft breathing. Then one morning, I woke up and she didn't. No last words, no big moment, just quiet. I sat on the edge of our bed for 90 minutes, staring at her hand in mine, feeling how small it seemed. I kept thinking, this can't be how our story ends. But it was. The funeral was 4 days later, with just a handful of people, some college friends, a nurse from the clinic, her old bookstore boss. No family. Standing by her casket, I felt like I couldn't breathe. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and it all felt so wrong. Liora loved days like that. People offered condolences, saying she was special, that she was in a better place, that I was lucky to have had her. I didn't want to hear it. Then, as I turned to head back to my car, a voice said my name. It was Vesper, my neighbor from across the street. She wore a plain black dress, no makeup, hair tied back simply. We'd barely spoken before, just the occasional wave while taking out the trash. Her eyes were steady as she said softly, "I'm coming by your place tonight. You shouldn't be alone." Before I could respond, she walked away. Her words weren't a suggestion. They carried a quiet certainty, like she already knew I'd need someone when the silence became too much. And she was right. After the funeral, I went home to the house Liora and I had shared. It felt like a stranger's place. Her shoes still sat by the door. Her half-rinsed coffee mug rested in the sink from before her final hospital stay, and her favorite throw blanket lay folded on the couch, untouched. I didn't move a thing. I sank to the living room floor, my back against the wall, clutching a framed photo from our wedding day. I didn't cry. I just stared, feeling like I was looking at someone else's life, lost for what to do next. Nobody hands you a guidebook for navigating life after losing the person who meant everything to you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the house grew dim, but I couldn't bring myself to flip on a light. It felt like the brightness would only amplify the hollow quiet. Around 7:30 p.m., a soft knock came at the door, and I almost ignored it, not in the mood to face anyone. But then I recalled Vesper's steady voice at the funeral, promising she'd stop by that evening, calm and certain, not forceful, but quietly resolute. I dragged myself to the door and opened it to find Vesper standing there, still in her simple black dress from the service, though she'd swap her heels for comfortable flats. She held a brown paper grocery bag in one hand and a thermos in the other, her gaze meeting mine directly, no hesitation or pity in her eyes. "Mind if I come in?" she asked gently, her voice warm but unintrusive. I gave a small nod and stepped aside to let her pass. She moved into the house with a quiet confidence, not like she'd been there before, but like she understood that just being present mattered more than any words could. She set the bag on the kitchen counter and unpacked it. A container of homemade soup, a fresh loaf of bread, and a couple of crisp apples, simple, thoughtful, nothing over the top. "I figured you might not have eaten today," she said, her tone kind but matter-of-fact. She was right. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd felt hungry, food seeming like an afterthought. Vesper poured steaming tea from her thermos into 2 cups and handed one to me. I took it, still too numb to say much. We settled on the couch, sitting in silence for a while, but it wasn't awkward. It felt steady, like a quiet anchor in the storm of my thoughts. I think she knew that words could do more harm than good if they came too soon. After a bit, she looked at me and asked softly, "Want to talk about Liora?" My breath caught, and I realized I'd been holding it in without knowing. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for," she replied, her tone gentle but open, inviting me to share if I wanted. And somehow I did. I started talking, telling her how Liora would hum little tunes while washing dishes, her voice soft and absent-minded. I shared how she doodled tiny flowers in the margins of her planner, each one different, like a secret garden. I mentioned her weird dislike for the smell of oranges, even though she'd pop orange-flavored candies like they were her favorite thing. I told Vesper about the hidden list of baby names Liora kept on her phone, always teasing me that I'd see it someday when we were ready. I opened up about the fear that gripped me every day after her diagnosis, how I'd put on a brave face for her, pretending I believed she'd pull through, but I'd break down in my car before work, tears blurring the dashboard. I admitted how helpless I felt, no matter how many extra shifts I worked or how many possessions I sold to cover her treatments. I even confessed how I'd started counting the days I thought we had left, like some grim mental tally I couldn't stop keeping, even though it tore me apart. Vesper just listened, cradling her tea, her eyes locked on mine, never rushing me or cutting in, even when my words faltered or I paused to collect myself. I don't recall everything I said. Some of it came out in fragments. Some of it probably didn't even make sense. but I remember the relief, like I'd finally let out a breath I'd been holding for months. At some point, I glanced at the clock and saw it was 1:45 a.m., and Vesper was still there, unmoving, steady as ever. "You can head home," I told her quietly, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "You've already done so much." She shook her head gently. "I'm staying until I know you're all right," she said, her words firm but kind. "You don't even know me," I said, feeling the weight of my own disbelief. She paused, then looked at me and said, "I've seen you. That's enough for now." There was a long silence, heavy but not uncomfortable, and then I asked, "Why did you come tonight, Vesper?" She glanced down at her tea, then back up at me, her expression soft but certain. "I've lived across the street for 4 years. I saw how you looked at Liora when you walked her to the car, how you'd mow her side of the lawn, fix the mailbox, bring her flowers every weekend. I saw the love you poured into her. I just couldn't let you come back to this empty house and feel like nobody noticed." Her words hit me hard, cracking something open inside me, because I truly believed no one saw, no one cared, that I could fade into the silence and no one would notice I was gone too. She stayed until 4:15 a.m., and we didn't sleep, just talked, cried, and sat in quiet moments that felt like they held the weight of the world. When she finally stood to leave, I walked her to the door. Before stepping out, she turned and said, "I'll check in tomorrow, and I'll keep checking in if that's all right with you." "It's all right," I replied, and I meant it, feeling a tiny shift inside, not a fix, but a small step away from being completely alone. The next morning, I didn't set an alarm, just woke up and stared at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing in. There were no hospital visits, no errands, no reason to rush, and yet Leora's presence lingered, like I could still hear her soft laughter echoing in the walls, making my chest ache. True to her word, Vesper knocked on my door just before noon. She didn't stay long, just dropped off a container of homemade lasagna and asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no, but thanked her, and she gave a gentle smile before heading back across the street. I didn't eat the lasagna right away. I just stared at it in the fridge for a while, then closed the door and sank back onto the couch, where I'd been spending most of my days. But around 3:10 p.m., I heated up a small portion and took a few bites. It wasn't just good. It was warm, real, like a quiet reminder of human kindness I hadn't realized I was craving. The days after that blurred together. I stayed inside, not working, having burned through my vacation days during Leora's final weeks, and after the funeral, I just couldn't go back. My boss was kind, telling me to take all the time I needed. Vesper kept showing up, sometimes with a grocery bag, sometimes with a simple note that read, "Call if you need anything." I never called, but I read every note, and slowly I started opening the door when she knocked instead of waiting for her to leave things on the porch. One afternoon, maybe 10 days after the funeral, she stopped by and asked if I'd like to take a walk. "A walk?" I echoed, caught off guard by the idea of leaving the house. "Just a quick loop around the block," she said, her voice light. "It's too nice out to stay cooped up." It wasn't much, just a 20-minute stroll through our neighborhood, but I said yes. We didn't talk about anything heavy, just the crisp fall weather, the neighbors' over-the-top Halloween decorations still up in November, and a broken swing set someone had finally hauled away. It felt strangely normal, which at first made my stomach twist, like enjoying the moment was somehow betraying Leora's memory. Vesper must have picked up on it, because she gave me a knowing look, like she understood the guilt that came with starting to feel alive again. Vesper paused mid-step and looked right at me, her voice gentle but firm. "Tobin, it's okay to let yourself smile," she said. "You're allowed to keep living." I didn't respond right away, her words lingering in my mind like a quiet echo for days, stirring something I wasn't ready to name. That first walk turned into another, then another, until it became a regular thing. Every few days, we'd stroll through the neighborhood together. Sometimes we'd end up on my front porch afterward, sipping coffee she brewed, dark and bold, the kind that warms you from the inside out. We didn't dive into heavy topics unless I brought them up, and even then, Vesper never tried to patch me up with advice or platitudes. She just listened, her presence steady and unforced. One chilly December evening, I found myself standing on her doorstep, holding a small tin of ginger cookies I'd baked, not entirely sure why I'd done it. I just remembered her mentioning once that ginger cookies were her favorite, and I found a mix tucked away in the pantry, bought months ago when life felt different. Vesper opened the door, her eyes widening with surprise. "You bake these?" she asked, a grin spreading across her face. I shrugged, feeling a bit sheepish. "Gave it a shot. No promises they're any good." She laughed, a warm, easy sound, and invited me inside. That night, we swapped stories about our lives before we crossed paths. She shared how she'd lived in Salt Lake City, working as a vet tech for 7 years, caring for animals with a quiet dedication, and how she'd lost her dog Sable the year before, a loss that still tugged at her. She'd never married or had kids, not because she didn't want a family, but because life hadn't unfolded that way for her. I opened up about Liora, not just the painful moments, but the bright ones, like the nights we'd spread a blanket in the backyard, counting airplanes blinking across the sky. I told her about the time Liora roped me into a dance contest at a local fair, both of us flailing like fools while strangers cheered, her laughter lighting up the moment. Vesper smiled through every story, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding of how much those memories meant to me. She never said things like "you'll get over it" or "she's in a better place," and that's what set her apart. She treated my grief like it was part of me, not something to fix. By January, we'd settled into a new rhythm. She'd stop by, I'd send her a quick text, sometimes just a word or two, and she'd show up with soup or I'd mend the wobbly railing on her porch. It wasn't about keeping score, it was about wanting to do something for someone again, a small spark of purpose flickering back to life. One morning after a big snow, I woke up early and shoveled her driveway before she stepped outside, the cold biting at my fingers but feeling good in a strange way. She opened her door, wrapped in a thick sweater and socks, holding a steaming mug of coffee. "You didn't need to do that, Tobin," she said, her voice soft but warm. "I know," I replied, brushing snow off my gloves, "but I wanted to." Her smile carried something deep, gratitude, recognition, something so human it caught me off guard. That afternoon, she left a folded note on my doorstep that read, "You're not walking this path alone. I see you, and I'm still here." I sat on the couch for a long time, turning that note over in my hands, not crying but feeling a shift inside like the sharp edges of my pain had dulled just a little. The house's silence didn't feel as suffocating, the air a bit less heavy, and for the first time since Liora's passing, I caught myself humming in the kitchen while brewing coffee, her old habit sneaking into my morning. Winter gradually softened into early spring, though in our town, the seasons shifted more in mood than temperature, with chilly mornings and gray skies giving way to occasional bursts of sunlight that hinted at hope. It had been roughly 6 months since Liora left, and while my grief hadn't vanished, it no longer crushed me every time I opened my eyes. Vesper had become a steady part of my life. More than that, a central piece of it, though nothing had changed in a big, official way. It happened slowly, like ice melting in a quiet stream. First her check-ins, then dinners a couple times a week, then Sunday walks, then evenings where she'd linger, sometimes dozing off on the couch with a blanket draped over her legs, her head tilted just slightly toward me. I didn't question it. It felt right, natural, like a warm light creeping into a dark room. One night, lying awake in bed, I realized I was thinking about her. Not romantically, not exactly, but about how I missed her voice when a day passed without hearing it, how I'd listen for the creak of her door across the street, how my mornings felt brighter when her porch light glowed. Her presence had become a comfort I didn't just want but needed. Still, guilt gnawed at me. Illogical, but persistent, like I was betraying Liora's memory every time I laughed at one of Vesper's stories or felt a warmth when her arm brushed mine as she handed me a coffee mug. I knew Liora was gone, that I hadn't done anything wrong, but the feeling clung to me, heavy and unyielding. Vesper never pushed, never tried to label what we were or cross any boundaries, and that's what made it possible to be near her. She gave my grief room to breathe instead of trying to replace it. In that space, something new began to take root, quiet and unhurried. One afternoon in mid-March, we sat on a bench in a small park by the edge of town, overlooking a narrow river where Liora and I used to sit. I hadn't been back since before her diagnosis, and the memories flooded in. "I haven't come here in forever," I said softly, my voice barely carrying over the sound of the water. Vesper didn't ask for details, just nodded, letting me speak. "Liora and I used to bring sandwiches here and toss bread to the ducks," I said. "There weren't many, but she loved how they'd waddle up like they recognized her." Vesper's faint smile held no judgment, just warmth, as she gazed out at the river. "You loved her deeply," she said, not as a question, but a quiet truth. I nodded, my throat tight. "She was everything to me, and now I don't know who I am without her." Vesper turned to me, her expression calm and steady. "You're still you, Tobin, just finding the version of yourself that exists after all this." Her words weren't grand or flowery, but they felt more honest than anything anyone had said since the funeral, sinking into me like a truth I'd been avoiding. When we stood to leave, she didn't say goodbye. She just walked beside me, close enough to feel her presence, but not so close it felt like too much. That evening, after dinner, she stayed later than usual. We sat on the couch, a crime documentary humming softly on the TV, neither of us really watching it. I glanced over at her, her face lit faintly by the screen's glow, and something in me stirred, though I couldn't quite name it. Vesper had kicked off her shoes, curling her legs beneath her on the couch, cradling a mug of tea with a calm, weary look in her eyes. "Vesper," I said, the words slipping out before I could think twice. She turned to me, her voice soft. "What's up?" I faltered for a moment before asking. "Why me? Why are you here, doing all this for someone you barely knew before everything happened?" She paused, setting her mug down on the coffee table, her gaze steady, not pitying, not puzzled, but grounded and sure. "I saw you, Tobin," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I saw you loved Liora, how you fought for her, how you broke when she was gone, and how you kept going anyway." She took a breath, then added, "And honestly, I'm here because I wanted to be." I didn't say anything more, but something inside me shifted, like a weight settling into a new place. A few days later, I asked her to help me sort through the guest room, not because I couldn't do it alone, but because I wanted her to be part of my space, part of something meaningful. We sifted through boxes of old tools, stacked books I'd been meaning to donate, and came across a blanket Liora had crocheted, its colors still vibrant. Vesper held it up gently, her voice soft. "Want to hold on to this?" I stared at it, untouched for months, and nodded. "Yeah, I'm not ready to let it go." She didn't push, just placed it carefully in a clean storage bin and moved on to the next task. By the time we finished, the room felt lighter, like we'd let go of something heavy without erasing the past. The next weekend, I cooked dinner for her. Nothing fancy, just pasta, garlic bread, and a simple salad, but it was something I'd made with my own hands. I set the table, lit a small candle without overthinking it, and opened the windows to let in a breeze that reminded me of Liora, but didn't sting anymore. Vesper arrived in jeans and a light sweater, her eyes lighting up when she saw the table. "You didn't have to go all out like this," she said with a warm smile. "I know," I replied, "but I wanted to." After dinner, we sat on the porch steps, the sky glowing pink with soft golden streaks as the sun sank. Her shoulder brushed mine, not in a big, romantic way, but in a quiet, real way that felt like the start of something new. It's been just over a year since Liora passed, and sometimes I still wake up expecting to feel her warmth beside me, her steady breathing filling the quiet. Sometimes I dream of her, not in a painful, haunting way, but like a memory that doesn't know it's supposed to fade. Grief hasn't disappeared. It's just softened, less jagged, always there but not as heavy. Vesper and I live together now. About 4 months after that night on the porch, she suggested moving. "What if we found a place that doesn't hold so many ghosts?" she asked, her voice gentle, not pushing. She was right. Every corner of that old house carried Liora's shadow. Her chipped mug on the shelf, the hallway where her scarves used to hang, the closet we never cleared out. At first, I worried it would feel like running away, but the more I thought about it, I realized it was about making room for something new, for Vesper for me. We found a small house in a nearby town, still quiet and simple, but fresh, with walls that didn't echo the past. The day we moved in, I stood in the empty kitchen, looking around, and felt a spark I hadn't felt in ages. Hope. Vesper never brought up marriage, never pressured me, like she knew I wasn't ready, and honestly, we didn't need a certificate to prove what we had. We chose each other every day, and that felt more real than any ring. But we did talk about the future, at first in soft, cautious ways, then gradually with more certainty, like plans that were starting to feel real. Last fall, Vesper told me she was pregnant. I didn't react the way I thought I would. No panic, no numbness. I just looked at her for a long moment, then stepped forward and placed my hand on her belly, still flat, but carrying something real. "You okay?" she asked, her voice quiet. I nodded. "I think I'm happy," I said, surprised to hear the words out loud, but they were true. The months that followed were filled with small, deliberate steps. We painted the nursery a soft green, adding little forest animal decals Liora would have loved. We scouted secondhand furniture, went to every doctor's appointment, and I even teared up during the first ultrasound, seeing that tiny flicker of life on the screen, proof that something new was beginning. Vesper gave birth to a boy in April, and we named him Thane. During her third trimester, she asked if I wanted to give him Leora's father's last name. I said no, not to forget Liora, but because this child, this life, was ours, a new chapter that deserved its own name. The day Thane was born, I held him and whispered that he'd grow up knowing about love, about strength, about Liora, and not just as someone I lost, but as someone who shaped the man holding him now. A week after Thane turned 10 weeks old, Vesper and I decided to get engaged. It wasn't a big, planned moment. No speech, no grand gesture. One morning over coffee, with her hair messy and eyes half open as she held our son, I looked at her and said, "Let's make it official." She smiled, leaned over to kiss my cheek, and said, "About time." That was it. We had a small backyard ceremony with a handful of friends, Vesper's cousin, and our old neighbor who used to wave to Liora across the street. We kept a photo of Liora on the mantle, next to a vase of wildflowers, and Vesper placed her bouquet there after we said our vows. Her idea, a quiet way of honoring Liora without trying to replace her. That's how I knew I'd chosen right. Life didn't go the way I'd planned. It rarely does, but kept moving forward, and slowly it became beautiful again, different, softer, maybe even richer in some ways. I still miss Liora, and I always will, but loving Vesper doesn't take away from that. It builds on it, reminding me I can heal, grow, and create something new even after everything's fallen apart. Now, when I walk into our kitchen and see Vesper feeding Thane or hear his giggles from the living room, I don't feel guilt. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the years I had with Liora, for the nights Vesper sat with me in silence, for the second chance I never asked for but somehow received. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love doesn't erase love. It grows around it, layers on top of it, and if you let it, it saves you.